Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of Second Kings. Today we're in Second Kings chapter 17. Here in this chapter, we're going to see the fall of the northern kingdom of Israel and the resettling of this particular region. So let's look at a few things, and some of the things that we're going to talk about today are more of historical value than they are necessarily lesson and application, but there's a little bit of both in here for us to be able to utilize. So let's look at some of the things that we find here in this chapter. First of all, at the beginning of the chapter, you have the fall of Samaria and of the northern kingdom of Israel to the Assyrians under the reign of Shalmaneser. But it's going to be because of the actions of the king of Israel, whose name is Hoshea. Hoshea is going to be forced to be a vassal of Shalmaneser's reign, and by that I mean he's going to have to pay certain amounts of taxes, as it were, to the Assyrian kingdom every year in order to keep Shalmaneser from destroying him. Well, Shalmaneser is going to find out that Hoshea is actually conspiring against him with the king of Egypt, who is the major rival in the region for the Assyrian Empire. And so Hoshea is going to be taken away. Samaria is going to be taken by being placed under siege for 3 years. And then the people are going to be carried away. And they are going to be dispersed throughout the kingdom of Assyria. And they are never going to be heard from as a coalesced people again. The way the Assyrians worked when they conquered certain regions is they took the majority of the population from one area and they scattered them throughout the kingdom, and then they brought in new people from other areas to repopulate the area. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in just a few moments. But at this juncture, this is going to be 722 BC. In 722 BC, the kingdom of Israel in that northern area of Palestine ceases to exist. All that will be left is Judah. Now, in the central portions of this chapter, God is going to explain why he allowed these things to happen. As a matter of fact, why he had been warning that these things were going to happen. If you go back to our studies last year in the book of Isaiah, there is extensive discussion of the things that are going to happen in Israel and why these things are going to happen at that particular time. But you have here in this setting, you have situations where God is going to tell the children of Israel just exactly why these things are going to take place. Beginning in verse number 9, the Lord is going to lay out Israel's sins. And he says, the children of Israel secretly did against the Lord their God things that were not right, and they built for themselves high places in all their cities, from watchtower to fortified city. The children of Israel were ones who, on the one hand, would state that they believed in God. And certainly God's prophets were all around. We've seen Elijah's work in those days. We've seen Elisha's work in those days. And all of the different things that God did to make sure that the people knew what he expected of them. And on one hand, you would have those that would do that to a degree, but secretly. Now, this isn't secretly from the standpoint that God didn't know, but rather that they did it in an underhanded way where they acted as though they were somehow keeping it from God. That nobody was going to know, nobody was going to find out, and yet everybody's doing it. And you have this situation where they're building up idols. They are sacrificing to false gods in the high places. They are ones who are continuously turning against God and trying to, in many ways, antagonize God by means of the things that they are doing. They will not keep his commandments. And as you look through the history of the northern kingdom of Israel, every single king has followed in the path of Jeroboam, which means they make things up for themselves. They decide what it is that they want to do and how it is they want to worship and who it is they want to worship. And nobody is truly interested in following God. And it's not just the kings, it filters all the way down into the people as well. Were there still some who were faithful to God? Yes, there were. Even in the days of Elijah, when things are so dark for the northern kingdom of Israel, God says he has 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal. There were still those who were faithful, but the overwhelming majority, when you're talking about an entire nation of people, were not. The overwhelming majority were people who, as he puts it in verse 14, stiffened their necks like the necks of their fathers, who did not believe in the Lord their God. And therefore these things that transpire with the northern kingdom of Israel are God's means of judging that northern kingdom. But the third thing I want us to notice here is the fact that we have the introduction of a group of people that you're going to read about in New Testament times, and we kind of see what has happened with these people. And so we have the birth of what is called in the New Testament the Samaritans. Now, in the days of Jesus, the Samaritans were hated by the Jews because they were partly Jews. They had heritage with Jews, but they were also ones who had heritage with an intermarrying with the Gentiles. And this is going to come because of what the Assyrians do. They are going to remove the majority of the Israelite people, and then they are going to bring in people from Babylon, from Cutha, from Ava, from Hamath, from Sepharvaim, and various other places to come in and repopulate this area and mix the nations so that they never have the power of an independent people. And this was going to be the way that the Assyrians maintained control, and the way that they tried to keep uprisings from happening within their country. Because if people speak different languages, if they come from different backgrounds, if they don't have a common interest or a common heritage to bind them together, then it's far less likely that they are going to react and rebel in certain ways. And so the Assyrians are going to send these groups in. Now these groups, as we see in chapter 17, are going to be those that originally don't know anything about God. And bad things start to happen because of that. But then they start to get one of the priests who's been carried away to come back and to teach them. And so they decide they need to worship God as well, that they want to worship God as well. And so they begin to do that. But the problem is, they are going to worship God as another one of their gods. And so verse 34 says, "To this day they continue practicing their former rituals. They do not fear the Lord, nor do they follow their statutes and their ordinances, or the law and commandment which the Lord had commanded the children of Jacob, whom he named Israel." They were ones who did some things to try to appease God, but they still retained their idols and their false gods. And this is going to be the problem moving forward, is that they are going to retain, and then as time goes by and you get closer to the first century, they are going to mix and mingle certain things. They are going to be ones who fully acknowledge the God of heaven. But at the same time, their traditions and various other things are going to be built out of the history of the gods that they used to serve, and the gods that some of them still serve. And so you have all of these different things coalescing together in the birth of what we call in the New Testament the Samaritans. These are some of the things that we find in 2 Kings chapter 17. I hope they're interesting and beneficial to you. Next time we'll come back and we'll begin looking at 2 Kings chapter 18. I hope you'll join us then. But until then, have a great day.